At a birthday dinner, my godmother asked me, "Is the $2,000 I send you every month still enough?" I replied, "What money?" Everyone turned to my parents, who froze. Godmother's calm voice demanded answers, and what unraveled next exposed a trail of theft, lies, and identity fraud that shattered the family. The piano music drifted gently through the high-ceilinged hall, bouncing off the gold-trimmed walls and heavy velvet curtains. Glasses clinked, candles flickered, and soft laughter carried through the air. Everyone was dressed like they were in a movie, or trying to impress someone who was. I couldn't tell which. I barely had time to shower before driving here from campus, and I'd spent the last hour trying not to yawn into my plate. My name's Nadia. I'm 23, a senior engineering student at Georgia Tech, and I work 2 part-time jobs, one tutoring calculus, the other doing overnight inventory at Target. So yeah, by the time I got to my godmother Vivian's 70th birthday dinner, I was half dead and trying to stay awake on espresso and adrenaline. The estate was enormous. Think stone arches, marble floors, and oil paintings of people who'd never smiled in their lives. I was seated at one end of a long banquet table, surrounded by cousins and distant relatives I barely knew. Everyone was sipping wine and trading stories about summer homes and startup investments, and I sat there trying to remember if I brought clean socks for tomorrow. Across from me, Theo, my younger brother, was in full charm mode talking about something to do with a startup pitch. He didn't have a job, but he sure talked like he did. My parents, Caroline and Marcus, sat beside him, laughing like he just solved world hunger. Then, between the second and third course, Godmother Vivian raised her glass and said, with that commanding voice of hers, "Nadia, darling, is the $2,000 I send you each month still enough for your expenses?" The room froze. I blinked. My fork hovered midair. "What money?" I said before I could stop myself. Silence. Dead, heavy silence. All heads turned to me, then to my parents. Vivian's glass paused near her lips. "The $2,000 I've wired to your parents' account every month, for your school expenses." Her voice had an edge now, sharp enough to slice right through the linen tablecloth. I stared at her. "I never got any money from you." The words were out and I instantly felt the change. It was like someone had blown out the candles, the warmth of the room evaporated. Laughter disappeared. My cousin across the table let her wine glass slip an inch too hard onto the plate. I looked at my parents. My mom's face had gone pale. My dad's jaw tensed like he was grinding his back teeth. Theo shifted in his chair, avoiding my gaze. Vivian's gaze sharpened. "You didn't get any of it?" she asked again, slowly this time. I shook my head. "Not a dollar." The entire room was holding its breath now, and I could feel mine starting to catch too. I wasn't embarrassed, not exactly. I was confused, tired, and now burning from the inside with something I couldn't quite name yet. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. My father cleared his throat like he wanted to lie but couldn't find the right one. And just like that, the birthday celebration turned into something else entirely. It wasn't a party anymore. It was a stage, and somehow I was at the center of it. Godmother Vivian set her glass down hard, and I knew then, whatever they were hiding had just cracked wide open. Nobody spoke for a solid 10 seconds. It felt longer. My heart thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then Vivian turned her chair slightly toward my parents. "Caroline, Marcus." Her voice was crisp, like she was in a courtroom, not a dining room. "Would either of you like to explain what exactly happened to the $24,000 I sent this past year?" My dad cleared his throat. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what she thinks." I cut in, my voice sharper than I meant. "You've been getting money for me? Every month." My mom finally spoke, voice high and trembling. "We didn't want to spoil the surprise, sweetheart." I blinked. "What surprise?" "We were saving it," she rushed on, looking around the table for support. "All of it, for after you graduate, as a gift, like a nest egg, so you'd have something to start your adult life." I could feel my face heating. A nest egg? I'm working 20 hours a week and sleeping 4 hours a night. I've been skipping meals to afford books. And you were building me a surprise. "We didn't want you to rely on handouts," my father added, suddenly sitting straighter. "It's important you learn financial independence." I stared at him, stunned. "I've maxed out 2 credit cards just to pay for parking and lab fees. I thought we were broke." Theo shifted beside him, his eyes glued to the tablecloth. He hadn't said a word. Vivian's tone hardened. "Caroline, I told you that money was for Nadia's expenses, her education, not some long-term fund, and certainly not to be hidden from her." Mom's smile, the one she reserved for charity galas and brunches, flickered like a dying bulb. "You didn't say we had to give it to her directly." "No, but I assumed you had integrity," Vivian said flatly. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor. My hands trembled under the table, so I curled them into fists. "I've been exhausted for 4 years," I said, looking down the table. "You all know I've been working 2 jobs and commuting in from that crumbling basement apartment. Not once did you offer help. Not once." "We didn't want to make you soft," my mom whispered. Vivian's hand smacked the table. "Oh, for God's sake, Caroline. She's studying engineering and working nights at Target. That's not soft, that's survival." Theo finally looked up. Can we not do this here? He muttered. Vivian rounded on him. Actually, Theo, I think here is exactly where this belongs. He swallowed and looked away. And in that moment, it clicked. I remembered Theo's new laptop, his weekend study retreats to cabins, how he never had to work, not even part-time, while I balanced 3 internships just to keep up. My voice cracked. Was the money used on him? Nobody answered, which honestly told me everything I needed to know. I sat back down slowly, mostly because my legs suddenly felt hollow. The taste of steak and red wine was long gone from my mouth. All I could feel was the pressure building behind my eyes and the cold ache starting in my chest. I didn't need them to say it. I already knew. Vivian's question had just ripped the last thread off a story I'd been pretending not to know the ending to. Because deep down, I'd always suspected. There'd always been signs, small, quiet ones. Easy to ignore when you were desperate to believe your family loved you the same. Theo got a car when he turned 16. Just something modest, my dad said at the time. A brand new Mazda. When I turned 16, I got a used bike from Craigslist. No helmet, character building, Mom had said with a smile. Theo got SAT prep courses, private tutors, and a brand new MacBook. I studied off old library books and hand-me-down notebooks with his name still on them. He was full of potential. I was reliable. Reliable enough to pack my own lunches starting in middle school. Reliable enough to babysit Theo, even though he was barely 2 years younger. Reliable enough to not ask questions. I remembered asking my mom once, sophomore year of college, if Vivian had ever offered to help with tuition. We were in the kitchen and I had just gotten a bill for an unpaid campus health fee I didn't even know existed. She had paused while slicing carrots. Why would she said without turning around. I don't know, I said. You've always been close with her. My mother turned then, knife still in hand. You know what your problem is, Nadia? You think everyone owes you something just because life is hard. That shut me up fast. I never brought it up again. Instead, I worked longer shifts, pulled more all-nighters, took fewer breaks and told myself this was just how it was. Not everyone had the luxury of support. Now I looked across the table at her, still composed, still trying to spin the story. And I saw her for who she really was. The phrase she always used when I struggled echoed in my head. Hardship builds character. She used to say it like it was wisdom, like I should thank her. I turned to Vivian, voice low but steady. I asked her once about you, if you'd ever offered to help. She told me no, that I needed to stop expecting handouts. Vivian's face darkened. That's a lie. I know that now, I said. Theo had gone pale. His wineglass sat untouched. For once he didn't have anything to say. That stung more than anything else, because he knew. He had to. Vivian leaned forward. Nadia, listen to me. None of this is your fault. And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed someone. But the damage had already been done. Years of being told to be grateful for scraps while someone else ate my share. And suddenly, I couldn't tell if the tears behind my eyes were from rage, grief, or finally realizing I wasn't crazy after all. The rest of dinner limped along like a wounded animal. No one knew where to look or what to say. Plates still held food, but nobody was eating anymore. The servers kept moving, refilling water glasses and clearing dishes like nothing had happened, but the air in the room was all wrong. Even the piano player had stopped. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I kept my hands in my lap so no one could see them shaking. Every few minutes, Vivian would glance down the table at me like she was trying to measure how much I had left before I cracked completely. Then, without warning, a sharp voice cut through the silence. What do you mean it was her money? Everyone turned. Anika, Theo's fiancée, had finally spoken. She stood up fast enough to rattle her wine glass. Her eyes were locked on him. You told me your godmother was covering your grad school apps, that she wanted to invest in your future. Theo looked stunned. Anika, not here. No, right here, she snapped. Because I've been working double shifts to help with your loans while you've been living off stolen money. My mom sat frozen. My dad pressed his napkin to his mouth like that would make him disappear. I thought Vivian just loved you extra, Anika went on, her voice rising. I defended you when people called you spoiled. When you dropped that marketing internship. I said, he's figuring things out. But now I see it. You never had to struggle because you were living off what belonged to your sister. Theo stood up. Can we please not do this in front of everyone? She shook her head, lips trembling. I'm done making you comfortable. And with that, she grabbed her clutch, turned on her heels, and stormed out of the room. Nobody moved. A few moments later, from the grand entryway, we heard a voice raised to hers, then Theo's, then something loud. A slap, maybe, or a hand against the wall. It echoed. Every head at the table turned toward the noise. When Theo returned, his jaw was tight, his eyes wild. He didn't look at me, he looked right at Vivian. This is your fault, he hissed. Vivian didn't flinch. You made your choices. She was fine before you opened your mouth, he muttered. But I wasn't. I hadn't been fine in years. And then I saw something on the floor near his chair, half under the tablecloth. A small envelope. Theo hadn't noticed it had fallen. I reached down, picked it up. A pawn shop receipt. Luxury watch. 4 days ago. Customer name. Theo Langley. I stared at it, the final pieces clicking into place. And suddenly I knew this wasn't just about money. This was bigger, dirtier, and far from over. I waited a few minutes after Theo returned to his seat, fuming, jaw clenched, arms folded tight across his chest. No one dared speak to him. Even my parents kept their eyes down, like maybe if they stayed quiet enough, this would all blow over. I excused myself softly. Restroom, I said, though no one asked. Vivian's eyes met mine briefly. I gave the smallest nod and she returned it. She knew. I wasn't going to the bathroom. The estate was massive, but I knew where the guest rooms were. I'd stayed here before when I was younger and still thought this family was something worth belonging to. The second-floor hallway was dim and silent, far from the dining room noise. I passed 2 locked doors before finding the one marked with Theo's initials, of course. Inside, it was exactly what I expected. Pretentious cologne, shoes scattered like an afterthought, and 2 open suitcases of expensive clothes half-folded and probably untouched since arrival. I started with the desk. First drawer, empty. Second, receipts, napkin sketches of app ideas, a crumpled ticket from some music festival. Nothing useful. But then I noticed the closet door slightly ajar. Inside, up on the top shelf, was a shoebox. I pulled it down, fingers already tingling. Inside were a dozen opened envelopes, bills, all past due. Some were in Theo's name, some weren't, some were in mine. I pulled them out slowly, unfolding one after another. Late notices from a credit card company I'd never opened, a medical bill from a clinic I'd never visited, an apartment lease I hadn't lived in since sophomore year, but they all had my name, and my old address, my date of birth. Then near the bottom I found the worst of it, a letter from a private loan company. Dear Nadia Langley, this is your 3rd and final warning. Except I'd never applied for this loan. Attached to the letter was a copy of the application. My name, my social, my signature, except it wasn't mine. He'd forged it. He'd stolen my identity, taken out loans, opened accounts, racked up debt, all in my name. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. My hands were ice cold. Theo hadn't just taken money meant for me. He'd buried me in debt to fund his own life. The pawn ticket made sense now. He'd run out of money. He'd started selling off the gifts Vivian gave him. And when that wasn't enough, he dug into my past, my discarded addresses, my name, my records. He used my life to keep his fantasy going. I swallowed hard. The betrayal clanged louder than my heartbeat. My chest felt like it had caved in. And somehow underneath the panic was a cold, quiet rage. I snapped photos of everything. Each document, each forged form, each envelope with my name twisted into someone else's lie. I slid the whole pile into my tote bag. Then I grabbed the pawn slip too. And I walked out. Back downstairs, I didn't return to the table. I veered toward the sitting room where Vivian usually disappeared to for her evening digestive. Sure enough, she was there, seated by the fire, one hand resting on a crystal glass, her expression unreadable. I closed the door behind me. She looked up. Well, I pulled the letters from my bag and laid them on the table in front of her. I found everything, I said quietly. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't favoritism. Her eyes flicked down to the forged signature, to the overdue bills in my name. It's fraud. Vivian stared at the pages in silence for a long time. Then she nodded once and something cold settled into her features. This ends tonight. Vivian didn't speak right away. She just kept staring at the documents I'd laid out in front of her, one hand on the stem of her glass, the other flipping slowly through each page like she needed to see every detail before allowing herself to feel anything. The flicker of her jaw told me when she got to the forged loan application. He used your name, she murmured. I nodded. And my social. That address on the credit card statement? That was my apartment junior year. He must have gone through my old mail. Her hand froze on the pawn slip. And this? He pawned one of the watches you gave him 4 days ago. I paused. He signed your name on the back of the certificate. Vivian sat back, letting the papers rest in her lap like they were hot to the touch. Her eyes were darker now, not sad, not even disappointed, just still, like ice before it cracks. How long have you known? About 30 minutes. She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. You always were the clever one. I looked down at my hands. I just needed to know. I kept thinking I was overreacting, that I was just tired and angry. You were tired because they made you tired, she said, voice firm now. And you're angry because you were betrayed. That isn't weakness, Nadia. That's clarity. We sat in silence for a few seconds. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting gold light across the room. Outside the door, I could still hear the faint clatter of forks and glasses, murmured voices trying to pretend the evening hadn't collapsed hours ago. Vivian picked up the pawn ticket and folded it neatly in half. I gave your parents that money to help you focus on your education. Not to spoil Theo. Not to funnel into some damn Instagram-worthy lifestyle. I nodded once. I know. She set her glass down and stood, tall and regal despite the ache in her eyes. You're coming with me. I blinked. Where? To the table. Vivian. She turned to face me, voice low but steel-edged. You've been silenced for long enough. I may be old, but I've still got a few tricks left in me. And tonight, I'm done protecting people who think lies are acceptable as long as they wear pearls and smile for the camera. She picked up the folder, her hand firm around the edges. I stood, heart hammering again. I'm not sure I can do this, I whispered. She looked me dead in the eye. You already did. There was no dramatic speech, no battle cry, just the two of us walking arm in arm back through the marble hallway, past stunned caterers and wine-sipping cousins, into the mouth of the family beast. As we entered, all heads turned. Vivian moved to the center of the room, cleared her throat, and held up the folder like a weapon. I believe we've all been kept in the dark long enough, she said, her voice slicing clean through the air. I didn't have to say anything, because this time she was speaking for me. Vivian didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The entire dining room fell into silence the second she opened the folder and placed the papers carefully on the table in front of her wine glass. I want everyone to take a good look at these, she said, her voice cutting like a razor wrapped in velvet. These are not just financial records. These are the receipts of betrayal, lies, and theft. Gasps. Forks froze midair. One of the cousins audibly whispered, "Oh my God," before their spouse elbowed them. She picked up the forged loan application. This, she held it between two fingers, is a private loan taken out in Nadia's name, signed with a forged signature, using her social security number. This is identity theft. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Vivian, please. No, Vivian snapped. You do not get to please me. Not after funneling money meant for your daughter into your son's pockets and then letting him bury her in debt to clean up his mess. Theo stood abruptly. Okay, this is being blown out of proportion. Sit down, Vivian said coldly without even looking at him. He did. Slowly. I felt the entire room shift then. Something cracked. The lies couldn't hold. Vivian turned to my father. You watched this happen. You signed off on every transfer I made. You said it was for Nadia, and you never once questioned where it went. My dad looked like a statue someone had chipped away at until only guilt remained. We thought we could control it, just until she graduated. Then we'd figure it out. You thought you could lie to me, Vivian corrected. And worse, lie to her. Mom tried again. It was supposed to be a surprise. A gift. Vivian's voice was suddenly low. Deadly. A gift doesn't leave a person hungry, Caroline. A gift doesn't put someone in debt. A gift doesn't make a child think they're unwanted. Mom's face went pale, lips trembling. She looked at Theo for help, but Theo wasn't looking at anyone. He was staring at the tablecloth like he could disappear into it if he tried hard enough. And then the kicker. Vivian turned back to the room. I will be restructuring my estate. Effective immediately. Murmurs rippled through the table like a rogue wave. I want every cent that was intended for Nadia repaid with interest. Out of your pockets. Not hers. And Theo, she turned her gaze on him, and I actually saw him flinch. You're no longer named in any trusts, scholarships, or future allocations. You can live off the lifestyle you've stolen, if you can afford it. Theo stood again, this time shaking. You're going to punish me for one mistake? Vivian raised an eyebrow. One? Should I count them for you? He looked like he might scream, but then he saw the envelope in her hand, the pawn ticket. His face crumpled. I didn't have a choice. You had every choice, Vivian said. You chose to gamble your future with someone else's name. And now you'll live with that. My mother stood. This is a private matter. It doesn't need to be handled in front of everyone. Vivian turned to her with a slow, scornful smile. You made it public the moment you let your daughter starve while pretending to be generous. Silence. No one moved. No one blinked. Then Vivian looked at me. Come, Nadia. I stood. My knees shook, but my voice didn't. For the first time, I said, I actually feel like I belong at this table. Vivian's hand found mine. And together, we walked out of the wreckage they'd spent years building, while the rest of them finally started to feel the weight of it all collapsing. The silence after we left the dining room didn't last long. From the sitting room, I could hear the low hum of voices swelling again. No longer elegant, polite conversation, but frantic, overlapping noise. The kind that happens when power shifts and the mask of civility finally slips. Vivian poured herself a fresh drink and offered me one too. I shook my head. I'm fine, I said, even though my hands were still shaking. I didn't expect them to fold so fast. She gave a humorless smile. That's because they were never standing, just leaning on what they thought I'd never take away. We didn't have to wait long. The door to the sitting room opened, and in came Uncle Victor, Vivian's brother-in-law, wearing his usual smug half-grin and a linen suit that practically screamed, retired early off someone else's labor. He stepped in like he'd just been nominated for family spokesman. Well, he said, chuckling like we were all in on a joke. That was certainly dramatic. But I have to say, Vivian, you handled it with flair. Vivian didn't rise. What do you want, Victor? Oh, just here to say I fully support what you did, he said smoothly. Honestly, I always thought Caroline and Marcus were a bit reckless. And Theo? Entitled from day one. You were right to cut them off. I watched him with narrowed eyes. Victor poured himself a drink from the cart, like he owned the place. If it were up to me, you'd restructure the whole family trust. Weed out the deadweight, you know? Focus on the ones who actually respect your values. Vivian studied him for a moment, then glanced at me. Isn't that interesting, she said, because Marcus just reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Victor froze. Vivian continued. Almost casually, he mentioned that you borrowed $80,000 from me. In 2019. You said it was for a real estate investment in Savannah. Victor's color drained faster than the wine in his glass. I did, he stammered. But that was a family arrangement. We agreed there'd be no paperwork. No paperwork, Vivian echoed. How convenient. He straightened, suddenly defensive. That money helped your niece, remember? Laura's tuition. Vivian's gaze didn't waver. You told me it was for a condo flip. Now it's for tuition. He fumbled. It's complicated. Behind him, the door creaked open again. Aunt Rachel, Victor's wife, stood in the doorway. Her expression stone cold. 80,000, she said. What tuition? Rachel, please. But she was already walking away. You lied to me. Again. A minute later, their son Jeremy brushed past the door with his car keys in hand. You're disgusting, he muttered as he walked out. Victor stood there, mouth open, hands shaking. Vivian. She turned her face toward the fire. You can see yourself out. He hesitated, like he wanted to say more. Then he left. I sat there stunned. Vivian finally sipped her drink and looked at me. Funny thing about rot, she said. Once you pull up one root, the rest start writhing out on their own. And she wasn't wrong. The whole tree was splitting down the center. And now that everyone smelled blood in the water, the real feeding had only just begun. Just when I thought the room had finally settled, I heard the soft shuffle of slippers on the hardwood floor. Grandpa Edwin. He moved slowly, but there was intention in his steps. The oldest man in the family, always quiet, always watching. He was the kind of presence people forgot to account for until he stood up and reminded them why silence often held the sharpest truths. He entered the sitting room and didn't bother looking at Vivian or me at first. He just walked to the window, staring out at the moonlight pooling over the manicured lawn like he was gathering his thoughts from somewhere far away. I was the one who suggested it, he said finally. His voice was low but clear. I blinked. Suggested what? The money, he said, turning slowly. Back when Vivian first told us she'd be sending you a monthly stipend, I told your parents to route it through them, that it would be easier for you, that it would feel more seamless. My stomach tightened. You told them to handle it? He nodded. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought they'd pass it on, Nadia. I truly did. I thought if it looked like it came from them, maybe it would patch the cracks, make them feel like decent parents again. Vivian's voice was calm but firm. You didn't think they'd keep it. Grandpa Edwin exhaled and sat slowly in the armchair across from us. No, I didn't. But I see now how foolish that was. I didn't know what to say. The man sitting across from me had never raised his voice, never taken sides. At least not in front of us. He was the family's old tree. Steady, stoic, unmoving. And now he was slumping under the weight of a truth that had taken far too long to surface. I thought I was simplifying things, he said. Instead, I made it easier for them to steal from you. He looked up at me then, and for the first time in my life I saw real remorse in his eyes. Not just guilt, understanding. The kind that comes from knowing you held the match that lit the fire, even if you didn't strike it. I should have said something when I noticed the way they favored Theo, he added. I should have spoken up when I saw you working yourself to the bone. But I told myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't my business. Vivian crossed her arms. It was always your business, Edwin. You're the patriarch. You had the authority. You had the power. He nodded slowly, and I wasted it. For a moment no one spoke. The flames in the fireplace crackled softly. Somewhere down the hallway someone laughed, probably drunk and unaware of what had just unfolded. I walked over and knelt in front of him. I forgive you, I said, but I'm done pretending things didn't happen. He reached for my hand and held it tightly. Good, he said. You shouldn't pretend anymore. And just like that, the last honest silence between us finally shattered. Not out of shame, but out of truth. And maybe that was the first time in years he saw me clearly, too. That was about a year ago. Since then, everything has changed, and I mean everything. I cut off my parents the week after the dinner. Not with some dramatic speech or courtroom-style confrontation. I just stopped answering. I blocked their numbers. I deleted the group chats. No more surprise visits. No more vague apologies that felt like guilt bait wrapped in parental language. They didn't call to apologize anyway. They called to explain, to justify, to shift blame. My mom said, we were just trying to teach you to be strong. My dad said, we thought you'd understand one day. But I did understand. That was the problem. Theo sent one message. Just one. I never meant for it to go that far. I didn't think you'd find out. I didn't respond. Vivian kept her promise. She transferred the full amount, every cent she'd meant for me over the last 4 years, plus interest. Not as a gift, not out of pity, but because she said, this was always yours and I'm just fixing a mistake I let happen too long. With that money I quit both my jobs. I moved into a decent apartment closer to campus, one with windows that opened and a kitchen that didn't leak when it rained. I bought myself a bed that didn't creak when I turned over and groceries that weren't expired or on sale because they were close. And I finally breathed. For the first time in years I wasn't waking up exhausted. I wasn't constantly calculating how many hours I needed to work to afford next month's bills. I started sleeping through the night. I started laughing more. I started feeling like a person again. I finished my degree at the top of my class. I joined a robotics research team I'd been too busy to apply to before. I made real friends. Ones who didn't just see me as the girl with 2 jobs and no time. I even reconnected with a few cousins from that dinner who reached out quietly after the dust settled. People who said I didn't know, and for once I believed them. I saw my grandfather again once a few months after the dinner. He was sitting on a park bench, feeding pigeons like he always used to. He didn't try to make excuses. He just said, I'm proud of you, Nadia. I should have said that sooner. I said, thanks, Grandpa, and that was enough. Then this past holiday season, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was soft, too soft. It's been a while, he said. We'd love for you to come home. Just for dinner. No pressure. Just family. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. I didn't feel guilty. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I was done. Done waiting to be loved the way I needed. Done shrinking myself to fit the image they wanted. Done giving to people who only took. People always talk about forgiveness like it's the final goal. But sometimes peace isn't forgiveness. It's just the decision to stop bleeding for people who cut you on purpose. Now I spend my weekends mentoring younger women in STEM. I tell them, your worth isn't measured by what you endure. It's measured by what you demand. And I mean it, because now I know what it looks like to choose myself. And I'll never go back.